The fever had started quietly. A whisper in the boy's chest. A flicker of warmth beneath the skin. At first, it seemed harmless, a restless night, a dry cough, the kind of thing children brush off with play and dreams. But on the second morning, his lips were pale and dry. By the third, he couldn't sit up on his own. Karim sat beside him, day and night, his hands calloused but trembling as he wiped his son's brow. He whispered stories that once made the boy laugh, about tree spirits and clever foxes, about skyfish that only swam in moonlight. But the boy didn't laugh anymore. Didn't even smile. His breaths came shallow. The color drained from his skin like watercolor in rain. The village healer came twice. Her hands were steady, her gaze sharper than most gave her credit for. She left behind herbs, damp rags, bitter tea. But on her third visit, she didn't touch the boy. She just stood in the doorway, silent for too long. "There is something," she said finally, "but it's far. Very far." Karim already knew what she meant. He'd heard the stories as a child, old tales passed from fire to fire, meant more to warn than to guide. "A cactus," she murmured, "alone in the southern dunes. It blooms red once a season, if the desert allows it. The fruit, it cools the fire inside, brings breath back to broken lungs." She didn't say more. She didn't need to. Karim looked at his son one last time before rising. The boy's hand was limp in his. His skin was hot, and somehow still cold. He gathered his things without a word. A flask of water. Dried dates. A shawl. A knife that had belonged to his father. And a little charm made of beads and bark, one the boy had made years ago. The sky outside was still black, but softening at the edges with violet light. No one was awake yet. The wind whispered through cracked shutters. The world was quiet. Too quiet. He turned to the healer. "Keep him breathing," he said. "I'll try," she replied. Karim nodded. Then he left. One foot after the other. Down the dust-packed road. Past the withered fig trees. Toward the dunes that swallowed the horizon. The desert began not with a sign, but with silence. The last crooked tree gave way to open earth, and the sound of insects faded until even the wind seemed unsure whether to follow. Karim stepped forward, and the world narrowed to sand, sky, and the soft weight of breath in his chest. There was no trail. Just the faint imprint of old footsteps, his own, maybe, or the ghosts of other journeys lost to time. The dunes ahead shifted with the wind's slow exhale, their edges smoothed as if the desert had spent the night brushing its face clean. He walked. At first, the rhythm came easily. One foot, then the other. The sand resisted gently, like it was trying to hold him in place, but gave way with each step. The sun, still low, painted the ridges in bronze and peach. It was beautiful, in a way that made him feel very small, and very awake. By late morning, the warmth had turned to heat. He adjusted the shawl over his head, its edges whispering against his ears. The flask at his side clinked softly when he moved. Each sip from it tasted of memory, warm, faintly metallic. But it eased the dryness in his throat, and that was enough. Time unraveled. There were no markers to count the hours, no trees to cast familiar shadows. The desert turned his thoughts inward. He remembered Adam's hand in his, limp but warm. The healer's quiet voice. The way the boy had once run barefoot through the garden, chasing a blue moth through the fig leaves. He whispered the boy's name once into the wind. It disappeared like breath in the cold. By afternoon, the dunes had grown taller. Climbing them became work, each step sinking slightly, pulling at his calves, asking more than it had the hour before. Still, he pressed on. At the top of one rise, he paused. The view stretched in every direction, endless. No trees. No water. No cactus. Only sand, folding into itself like old parchment, and a sky so wide it made him dizzy. There was a peace to it, though. Not comfort, but acceptance. He slid down the far side of the dune and walked until the wind returned, gentle, curling along his skin like a hand tracing his shoulder. It brought with it the faintest scent of something cool. Stone? Water? Memory? He followed. Not because he was sure, but because it was better than doubt. And as the sky began to bleed into twilight, the heat softened. The dunes no longer glared. They whispered. Each shadow stretched long and slow across the sand, and for the first time that day, he let himself stop. He sank into the side of a low rise and rested, his hands folded in his lap. Above him, the first stars arrived. He watched them in silence, his body heavy but not in pain. His thoughts blurred at the edges, slow as the wind. And when he finally closed his eyes, he dreamed not of danger. He dreamed of his son, not sick, not frail, but laughing. Running ahead of him through a grove of orange trees, sunlight dappling his hair. The desert breathed quietly around him. And he slept. The second day in the desert began without sound. No birds. No wind. Only the faint hiss of sand moving somewhere far off, as if the dunes were breathing beneath their surface, stretching in their sleep. Karem stirred slowly. He was wrapped in the folds of his shawl, the hem crusted with fine dust, the taste of it dry on his tongue. His mouth was parched. His limbs were stiff. But not in pain, just quiet. Like the ache of a story half finished. He sat up and looked around. The world hadn't changed. Still dunes. Still sky. Still nothing. But there was a strange stillness to it all now, as if he had passed through some unseen threshold overnight. He took a sip of water. Just one. Let it linger before swallowing. Then he walked. The morning wore on in silence, save for the whisper of his feet. Each dune looked like the last, though sometimes they shimmered slightly in the light, like mirages even when they were real. The sky deepened, turning from pearl to sapphire, and the wind began to rise in little swirls, tugging at the edges of his clothes. It was around noon when he first felt the shift. Not in the landscape, but within himself. It started like a daydream, something at the edge of his vision. A flicker of light, or maybe motion. He turned toward it, but saw only dunes. Sky. Heat. And then, a sound. Soft. Low. Familiar. Laughter. Adams. Just one burst of it, carried on the wind, playful, clear, impossible. Karem froze. He looked around again. Nothing. No footprints but his own. No trees. No voices. Still, something in him stirred. It was a memory, wasn't it? Yes. That day in the orchard. The boy chasing beetles with a carved stick, giggling every time he stumbled over a root. That was all it was. But still, he turned toward the sound and walked. The air grew warmer. The light, stranger. And then, the haze arrived. It started subtly, a shimmer in the air, like he was walking through rising heat. But then it thickened, slow and golden, as if the sun itself had melted into mist. Shapes softened. Shadows lengthened. There was no horizon anymore, just the curve of the next dune, and the next, each one rising out of the blur. Karem felt his breath slow. Not from effort, but wonder. Or maybe confusion. Was this real? He looked down at his hands. They seemed solid. Felt real. The sand beneath his feet crunched faintly, still warm, still textured. But the silence had changed. Now it pulsed. A slow rhythm. Not a sound, exactly, but a presence. Like the air was holding its own breath. He kept walking. Not because he knew the way, but because stopping felt wrong, like falling out of step with a song you didn't know you were dancing to. Time slipped. At some point, the haze parted, just for a moment, and he saw it, a figure. Far away, down the slope of a shallow basin in the sand. It was standing still. Or sitting. It was hard to say. But it was there. And then it wasn't. He blinked. Rubbed his eyes. Gone. His heart beat faster. Just a little. Not fear, something else. A strange pull. A hum in his chest. He moved toward where the figure had been, feet dragging slightly, not quite trusting the ground to stay where it was. And again, a sound. This time not laughter, but something like humming. Faint. Wordless. A melody with no beginning. No end. It circled his thoughts like wind around a stone. The haze thickened again. And in its folds, the memories returned, not like images, but sensations. The weight of Adam in his arms as a baby. The smell of rosemary in the kitchen. The flicker of lantern light on the walls during a thunderstorm. All of it soft. All of it slow. All of it layered, as if the desert itself had peeled open and was showing him pages from a life he didn't remember choosing. Karem stopped walking. Not out of fear. But because something in the air told him to. He stood, surrounded by golden mist, hands loose at his sides. His heart slowed. His mind quieted. And for a moment, he forgot why he had come at all. Only a whisper remained, not words, just warmth. Then the haze began to lift. Not all at once, but gradually. The dunes sharpened again. The sky returned. And ahead, just at the edge of what he could now see clearly, was something new. A rise in the sand. A shape beyond it. Still distant. Still unclear. But real. He began walking again. And the humming faded with the mist. ChatGPT said. Here is Chapter 4, The Bloom. From the well in the dust, your tranquil, sleep-guiding desert journey. Chapter 4, The Bloom. The day drifted forward like breath. Karem walked without hurrying. The haze behind him had dissolved, and with it, the strange warmth and fragments of memory. But something had changed in the rhythm of his movement, a looseness in his limbs, a softness in his thoughts. He had passed through something, though he couldn't have said what. He only knew he was closer now. Closer to the place. Closer to the bloom. The sand glowed pale gold under the early afternoon sun, and the air carried a warmth that pressed gently on the skin, not cruel, not scorching, just steady. He no longer looked at the sun to track the hour. Time had become something woven into each step. He crested a low rise, and the land before him opened. A shallow basin. And in the center, surrounded by bare sand as if the world had drawn a quiet circle around it, stood the cactus. Tall. Still. And in full bloom. It wasn't large, not like the story said. It didn't glow or hum. But something about it made the air feel reverent. As though the desert itself had paused to bear witness. Its stem was the color of old jade, dusted with sand, spined and weathered. And from its crown, nestled between rows of careful thorns, rose 5 blossoms. Deep crimson. Velvet-petaled. Still as held breath. Karem didn't speak. He stepped into the basin slowly, the sand beneath his feet cooling as he descended. It was quiet here, even the wind seemed to hold back. Each footfall felt placed by something older than him. When he reached the cactus, he knelt. Not out of exhaustion. But respect. The blossoms smelled faintly of rain, sharp, earthy, and clean. Not sweet. Not floral. Just alive. He reached out carefully and touched the base of the lowest bloom. It was warm. Soft. Delicate. But not fragile. He unwrapped a piece of linen from his satchel and, with slow fingers, clipped the blossoms one by one, wrapping each gently, like cradling a child's breath in cloth. Their juice stained the fabric faintly, dark and red, almost rust-colored. When the last bloom was nestled away, he sat back in the sand and looked up. The cactus stood the same, now empty of its offering. It didn't sway, didn't sigh. But Karem thought it looked satisfied. He breathed in slowly, then exhaled with a quiet shudder he hadn't known was waiting in his chest. The silence deepened. And that's when he noticed it, a movement, just past the ridge. A figure. Faint. Still. Watching. His eyes followed it, but it was gone as soon as he tried to focus. A trick of the light. A remnant of the haze. Or something else. He didn't move. Instead, he stayed seated, letting the warmth of the sand soak into his legs. His body had begun to feel heavy again, not the weight of exhaustion, but of release. As if the tension that had held him upright for days had finally let go. And then, from behind, a voice. Soft. Familiar, though he had never heard it before. You found it. He turned. There, standing just above the basin's edge, was the old woman. She wore robes the color of moonlight and sand, pale, layered, unwrinkled despite the wind. Her hair was silver, though not in the way of age. More like river stones. Her face was lined, but calm. Unreadable. She smiled. Just a little. Karem rose without speaking. She stepped down into the basin, her bare feet making no sound on the sand. Few make it this far, she said. Fewer with purpose. Karem's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. I need it for my son. I know, she said. She stopped a few paces from him, her eyes steady. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The wind had vanished again. Even the sun seemed distant, held at the edge of the sky by something unseen. Then she looked down at the cactus. Her expression softened. Old thing, she murmured. Still trying to bloom in this world. Karem wanted to ask how she knew about it, how she knew he would be here, but the words never came. They felt unnecessary. As if this meeting had already happened long ago, or always would. Come, she said gently, turning. There's water not far. He didn't hesitate. He followed. As she walked, her figure shimmered faintly, not like a mirage, but like moonlight behind a veil. He blinked once, and she seemed younger. Blinked again, and she was aged like the hills. She led him away from the basin, around the curve of a low dune, and there it was. A well. Built of smooth stones, sun-warmed and quiet. A wooden pail rested beside it. A coil of rope lay neatly at its base. There was no marker, no path, no sign of who had made it. The woman reached down and drew water without effort. It rose clear and cold. She offered him the pail. He drank. It tasted of cool wind and something older than earth. He could feel it travel all the way to his stomach, then bloom outward, slow and quiet, like a single ripple on a sleeping pond. His eyes stung. He didn't cry, but he could have. The woman sat on the ground and motioned for him to do the same. And they stayed there for a long while. No words. Just breath. Just sky. Just sand. And somewhere beneath it all, water. Night came like a tide, slow and silver. They sat by the well as the sky deepened into velvet. The first stars blinked into view, not like sparks, but like soft eyes opening in the dark. The firelight from a small bundle of dry twigs flickered quietly between them. No smoke. No crackling. Just a gentle orange rhythm brushing against their faces. Karem had tried, once or twice, to speak. To ask who she was, how she knew. But each time, the words thinned on his tongue, lost to the hush of the moment. And it felt right. As if saying too much might break something delicate that held the night in place. The old woman sat with her hands in her lap, eyes watching the flame but seeing something deeper. "You walked far," she said, not as a question. "Not just in distance." He nodded. Her gaze shifted to the wrapped blossoms at his side. "It'll work, you know. The flower. It knows what it was picked for." Karem looked down at the bundle, then up at her. "Have you helped others?" "Not in the way you think." He tilted his head, the question clear on his face, though he didn't voice it. Her lips curled into something faint, a smile, or a memory. "I don't stay in one place," she said. "I'm wherever the desert needs someone to rest. But there's nothing here. No roads. No signs." She looked around them, then met his eyes. "That's why it works." And suddenly, he felt it, the sense that all around him, everything he'd seen, everything he'd walked through, had been gently shaped toward this moment. Like the wind itself had been guiding him not toward the flower, but to her. To the well. To the stillness. To the reminder that he was not alone. He swallowed. "I thought I was hallucinating." "You were." "Then, are you real?" Her eyes shimmered, not with light, but with layers, like looking into deep, slow-moving water. "Does it matter?" He didn't answer. Instead, he turned his face toward the stars. The sky was so vast here it almost hummed. His muscles softened. His thoughts, which had been clenched like fists for days, finally released. She rose quietly and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You'll sleep now," she said. "And when you wake, the way forward will be clear." He wanted to thank her, desperately, to express something real, something beyond the simplicity of gratitude. But he only managed a nod, slow and quiet. She draped a thin blanket over his shoulders, soft, warm, the color of faded moonlight, and returned to her place beside the fire. And there, with the hush of the sand and the echo of the well and the presence of someone, or something, ancient nearby, Karem lay down. The last thing he saw before his eyes drifted closed was her face. Not young. Not old. Just eternal. As if she had been there long before the sand had cooled. And would be there long after the stars burned out. Karem woke with the silence of someone who has slept exactly as long as they needed. There was no moment of confusion, no disorientation. Only a quiet awareness that he had crossed some invisible threshold in the night. His body no longer ached the same way. The heaviness was still there, yes, in his legs, in his shoulders, but it was a softened weight now, like the final pull of a tide before the sea falls still. The air was cool. Morning had only just touched the rim of the sky, painting it with soft streaks of pearl and ash. The fire was out, its ashes undisturbed. And the old woman was gone. There was no sign of her footprints. No depression in the sand where she had Saturday. No fading warmth where the blanket had been. Only the well remained, quiet and solid, its rope coiled neatly beside it, as though no hand had ever touched it. Karem sat for a while, unsure if he felt peace or sorrow. Perhaps both. He thought of speaking aloud, in case she was still listening, but no words came. Instead, he stood. The linen-wrapped flowers still rested beside him, untouched and somehow still cool, as if they had been kept in shade all night. He reached for them with a kind of reverence, cradling them against his chest before tucking them deep into his satchel. He felt no urgency, no panic, only the steady rhythm of returning. There was no map, no trail. But his feet remembered. His body remembered. It was as though the desert, having tested him, had now softened its edges, like a once unwelcoming house turning hospitable. The sun rose behind him as he walked. The dunes no longer looked like obstacles, but waves. Familiar, almost beautiful. And the wind, once a quiet adversary, now moved like a guide, gentle, brushing along his shoulders, nudging him forward. He passed a stretch of sand where, days ago, he had fallen to his knees and laughed at a mirage. It looked different now. Smaller. Like the echo of a dream he could no longer quite recall. By mid-morning, he paused to drink. The water from the well still tasted impossibly fresh, as if it carried something beneath the surface that he couldn't name. He thought of her again. Of her hands, steady and calm. Of her voice, which hadn't needed to be loud to reach deep. Of her presence, which might not have been flesh and bone at all. Perhaps she had been something else. A memory. A promise. Or perhaps, simply, she had been what the desert offered to those who walked far enough to deserve it. He didn't try to understand it. He simply kept walking. Each hour passed like a slow breath. The sand no longer seemed endless. The heat no longer punished him. Even his thoughts moved differently now, less like fire, more like water. Flowing. Slow. Reflective. He stopped only when the desert told him to. When the light grew long, and the dunes stretched into shadows, he lay beneath the open sky, wrapping himself in stillness and starlight. That night, he dreamed of Adam, not in a bed, not weak, but outside. Running barefoot through shallow water. Laughing. Healthy. Whole. When he woke, the image lingered, not like a memory, but like a truth waiting to arrive. He walked again. And on the third day, the sand gave way to stone. On the fourth, stone gave way to scrub. The wind carried different smells now, green things, living things. And in the distance, just past a low ridge, he saw the edge of his village. A roof. A tree. Smoke curling faintly from a chimney. Home. The final steps toward the village felt slower than the miles that had come before. Not from exhaustion. Not from fear. But from something gentler, the weight of hope, cautious and fragile, growing heavier with every breath. The wind no longer moved with him. It had stopped just at the edge of the ridge, as though this was a boundary it dared not cross. Karim paused at the top and looked down at the place he had left behind, the olive trees, the soft rooftops, the faint trails winding like stories through the dust. From here, his home was just another shape among many. But he knew it. Knew every door, every bend in the path, every cracked window that let the sun fall in. He walked the last stretch slowly, savoring the ordinary. A neighbor glanced up and froze. A woman paused mid-sweep. A dog raised its head, then lowered it again. No one spoke, but they watched, not in judgment, not in surprise, but with the kind of silence reserved for sacred things. Karim turned down the final path, his eyes already full. The door was ajar. Inside, the house was dim and still. A small lamp flickered near the bed, casting soft gold onto the worn wooden floor. And there, where he had left him, lay Adam. Not pale. Not trembling. Sleeping. Breathing. Karim didn't move. He stood in the doorway, afraid even a step might break the spell. The healer looked up from her place at the boy's side. She said nothing at first. Just rose slowly, crossed the room, and placed a hand on Karim's chest, just over his heart. Then she whispered, "His healing." The words cracked something deep inside him. He went to the boy, sank to his knees, touched his hair, his cheek. The skin was warm. Not hot. Not fevered. Just warm. Adam stirred. His eyes fluttered open, then closed again, then opened once more. A slow smile formed. "Papa," he rasped. Karim let out a breath that had been caught for days. "I'm here," he said, and gathered his son into his arms. There were no words for the feeling. No names for that kind of peace. That night, the house was quiet, but it was a different quiet than before. Not the brittle hush of worry. Not the weight of waiting. This was the silence of safety, of something sacred having returned. Adam slept. The healer stayed a while, tidying her things in slow, unhurried motions. She didn't ask about the journey. Didn't ask what Karem had seen, or who he had met. Only as she left did she pause. "You walked deep," she said, her voice soft. He nodded. "Farther than I knew was possible." She looked at him for a moment, then added, "And something walked with you." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Outside, the wind had picked up again, soft and dry, curling like a sigh along the edge of the eaves. He lay beside Adam that night, not to watch over him, but simply to be near. And as the child slept, breathing slow and sure, Karem closed his own eyes. For the first time in many nights, he slept with no visions. Only quiet. The days that followed passed like ripples in still water. No great moments. No sudden changes. Only the slow, quiet rhythm of healing. Adam grew stronger with each sunrise. He began to eat again, first in spoonfuls, then in quiet hunger. His voice returned in whispers, then laughter. By the fourth day, he asked to be carried outside, to feel the sun on his face. Karem obliged without a word, lifting his son with the same care he had used to carry the fruit. The garden, though unkempt now, welcomed them with the soft rustle of wind in the grass. Bees moved lazily from flower to flower, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and earth. They sat together on a low bench beneath the olive tree. The branches, thin and silvered with light, swayed gently above them. Adam leaned into his father's side, his head resting just below Karem's shoulder. It was quiet, but not empty. The kind of quiet that made space for memory. Adam spoke first. "You were gone a long time." Karem nodded. "Yes." "Were you scared?" He paused, then answered honestly. "Sometimes." "Did you see anything?" the boy asked. "Anything strange?" Karem thought of the visions. The ghost glint of water on sand. The sound of Adam's voice rising from nowhere. The old woman's smile. "I saw things I don't quite understand," he said. "But they helped me find my way." Adam was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, "I think I dreamed about you. Walking. Like a shadow in the heat. But you were glowing." Karem looked down at him. "Maybe you did." Another pause. "Was there anyone with you?" Karem hesitated. He could have said no. Could have left it in the realm of exhaustion and sunstroke. But something in the air, in the boy's tone, felt sacred. "There was a woman," he said slowly. "I don't know her name. I don't even know if she was real." "Like a ghost?" Adam asked, wide-eyed. "Maybe," Karem said. "Maybe something else." They sat with that. There was no fear in it. Just wonder. And a shared sense that not everything had to be understood to be true. Later that evening, when Adam slept once more, Karem sat by the fire with a warm drink between his hands. The flames flickered gently, casting long shadows along the wall. And for the first time since returning, he let his mind drift back, not to the pain, not to the thirst, but to the shape of the dunes, to the silence of the stars, and to the stillness of the well. He closed his eyes. And in the hush of that room, he remembered something he hadn't before. As he had walked away from the well, just before cresting the ridge, he had turned to look back one last time. And though he hadn't seen her in that moment, he now recalled a strange detail. The stones at the base of the well had shifted, revealing a faint shimmer, not of water, not of glass, but of light. Soft. Pale. Almost like moonlight folded into sand. It had pulsed once. Then vanished. He hadn't thought much of it then. But now, in the quiet of his home, with Adam safe in the next room and the desert no longer at his back, he let that image settle deep into his chest. He didn't try to name it. He only let it be. Weeks passed. Then months. Seasons shifted in silence, as they always had. The olive trees bloomed, then bore fruit, then shed their leaves again. The sun moved lower in the sky, and the winds that once carried dust began to carry coolness instead. Life returned slowly to its shape. But Karem did not forget. There was no forgetting the desert, its endless hush, its sacred heat, the way it stripped everything away except what mattered. He carried it with him now, not as a weight, but as a thread woven through every breath. Each morning, when Adam woke and smiled, Karem whispered his gratitude to the wind. Not out loud, not even with his lips, just in the soft language of thought, like a leaf drifting across still water. And one morning, as pale clouds glided overhead, he felt it. The pull. Not a command. Not even a voice. Just a stillness inside that gently opened its eyes and said, "It's time." That afternoon, he packed a satchel with care. Bread. Water. A worn strip of cloth from Adam's old blanket. And something he had been carving for weeks, a small stone pendant, smooth and rounded, the shape of a flower blooming from rock. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. Only that he'd be back by the second sunset. And just before he left, he sat with Adam in the garden again. "You're leaving?" the boy asked, not with fear, but with curiosity. "Just for a little while." "To see her?" Karem looked at him. The boy's eyes held no doubt. He nodded. "Yes." Adam thought for a moment, then reached into the pocket of his tunic. He drew out a tiny shell, pale and worn smooth from his basket of treasures. "Give her this," he said. "If she's real." Karem smiled. "Even if she's not, she'll find it." The desert welcomed him back like an old friend. He took a different path this time, one guided less by memory and more by feeling. The sun was lower now, the days shorter. The dunes had shifted, as they always did. But the silence remained unchanged. He walked without rush, as if the ground beneath him were breathing with him, inhale with each step, exhale with each pause. He stopped when he was tired, drank only when his body asked. There was no urgency, only rhythm. By the second nightfall, he saw it. The well. It stood just as before, nestled in a cradle of low dunes, its stones sun-warmed and familiar. But there was no hut this time. No light. No movement. Only the well, and the breeze, and the whispering hush of the sand. Karem knelt. He untied the satchel, unwrapped the cloth, and laid the shell and the pendant gently at the well's edge. Then, as if guided by instinct, he placed the strip of blanket beside them. He didn't speak. Didn't ask or explain. He simply bowed his head. And in the quiet, he felt it again. A warmth. Not in the air. Not on his skin. Inside. A warmth that touched no muscle, no bone, only the place where wonder lives. When he lifted his head, the offerings were still there. But something had changed. A single bloom, small and red, like a whisper, had grown between the stones. No cactus. No stem. Just the bloom. Karem smiled. He stood, brushed the dust from his knees, and turned to leave. But before he stepped away, he looked back one last time. The well shimmered. Not in sunlight. Not in shadow. But in stillness. Karem walked without hurry. The desert stretched behind him, endless and silent, but it no longer felt like a place to be feared. It was no longer a wilderness of danger and thirst. Now it felt like memory, like something sacred that had shaped him and let him go. His feet moved steadily over the sand, the sky above washed in blue-gray light. The stars hadn't yet appeared, but the sun was already resting beyond the horizon, leaving only its outline in the cooling air. As he walked, he didn't think of the miles. He didn't think of the old woman, or wonder where she had gone. He didn't try to name the feeling growing in his chest. He simply breathed. And with each breath, the world softened. The sound of his own footsteps seemed more distant now. The wind barely moved the sand. The last heat of the day slipped from the dunes like a whispered farewell. And within that quiet, something opened. Not like a door. More like a curtain drawn back to reveal stillness behind it. His body moved through the darkening land like a thought made flesh, gentle, slow, without resistance. The night was not pressing down on him, it was cradling him, supporting him, reminding him that he had made it through, that he had come to the edge of what he thought he could endure, and stepped beyond it. There was no village yet in sight. But he did not look for it. Because something in him knew, he was already home. By the time he crossed the threshold of his home, night had deepened. The hearth glowed faintly. The air smelled of warm stone and lavender. And in the next room, he could hear the gentle rhythm of Adam's breathing. Slow, even, whole. Karem set his empty satchel beside the door. He sat down quietly on the woven mat near the fire, his hands resting on his knees, eyes half-lidded. The flames moved without urgency, casting soft amber light along the walls. And in that stillness, in that final hush, he closed his eyes. He saw the cactus bloom. He saw the shimmer of the well. He saw the old woman's hand raised in silent farewell. And then, in the distance of memory, a sound. Water. Flowing. Soft. Endless. And beneath it, the deeper sound of breath, not his own, not Adam's, but the breath of the desert itself. Timeless. Patient. Alive. Karem did not speak. He did not need to. Somewhere, far out in the dunes, the sand shifted softly, and the stars, the same ones that had watched him through every step, began to pulse gently in the sky above. Not with brilliance, but with peace. And in that gentle glow, sleep came. Not like falling, but like returning, to a place that had always been waiting. The end.